بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم نور قلوبنا بالعلم وزين أخلاقنا بالحلم وافتح بيننا وبين قومنا بالحق وأنت خير الفاتحين ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته brothers and sisters وطبتم وطاب ممشاكم وتبوأتم من الجنة منزلا بإذن الله ثم أما بعد Every now and then we break the routine, and instead of just going with the tafsir series, we just stop for whatever reason might be, and we go to a different topic. Sometimes in Ramadan we break the tafsir and just go with the rules of fasting, rules of zakah, and on and on. Recently, it was brought to my attention that there is a kind of discussion within our community regarding the status of abortion, the Islamic perspective regarding abortion, whether it is absolutely permissible, absolutely prohibited, or something in between. And to be honest with you, this is one of the topics that I do not like to talk about. I do not like to talk about, to be honest with you all. Not because there is something that we are ashamed of or we are so embarrassed. Alhamdulillah, our deen is very clear and very obvious. There is nothing to hide and there is nothing to be ashamed of. But the topic itself is a kind of sensitive, and sometimes talking about it publicly might have some consequences. And that's why I do not like to talk about it. However, since it was brought to my attention, I was requested by some brothers to talk about it. Well, I have no choice but to talk about it. A few points to take into consideration before we dig in depth, as they say. Number one, always have in mind that there is a difference between the creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as far as the existence of the soul is concerned. As far as the existence of the soul is concerned. There are some creatures who are called living creatures, but they do not have a soul. So they are soul-free living creatures, okay? The plants that you have in your front yard and your backyard and around you, those are creatures, and those are living creatures, okay? Those are living creatures, but they are non-soul living creatures. Okay, the tree that you have in front of your house is a growing one, is a living one, but it does not have a soul. It does not have a soul, right? Unlike you and I. While we humans, animals, some other creatures like angels and jinn, they do have a soul. So if you want to categorize, the living creatures, you can say, for example, we have a non-soul living creatures and we have a soul-based living creatures. Okay, this is number one. And number two, when we talk about abortion from an Islamic perspective, even if we concluded with the assumption that the conclusion is that abortion is permissible within certain conditions, it does not mean that it is recommended. No. Sometimes, a certain issue is permissible, however, it is extremely disliked. It is extremely disliked, okay? Maybe it's not our topic for tonight, but, some scholars believe that divorce is permissible, yet it is disliked, okay? Now, regardless whether the hadith that they refer to is an authentic one or not, that's a different discussion. I'm just bringing to your attention that a certain act might be, or a certain thing, might be permissible in a sense that it is not purely haram or purely prohibited, but it does not mean that it is purely permissible. There is something in between. There is a gray area, okay? And there is something that might be permissible, yet with a lot of restrictions. And if you have to do it, then you need to be extra careful, and it's always preferred to, to be in the safe side. Number three, why we are discussing the abortion issue nowadays, it's not a secret that this is a debatable issue nationwide here in the US, and it becomes like more and more serious issue, a hotter issue. Okay, whenever we come closer to the presidential election, because the Democrats and the Republicans, they have different opinions, different positions regarding abortion. Republicans are very strict, very conservative. They prohibit, abortion, as you know, while Democrats are more liberal, more open-minded. They do not mind allowing abortion. Discussing this issue tonight does not mean that we are leaning toward the Democrats or leaning toward the Republican. No, we are independent. We have our own religion, our own principles, okay, our own belief, our own evidences, our own religious authorities. However, we might agree, we might disagree with some, political parties in the U.S. So agreeing with a certain group does not mean that we politically support them 100%, or we are politically against the other party 100%. Those are like two different completely issues. So I wish we do not mix them together. The next point is that there is a mainstream fatwa or understanding that the soul is blown or breathed in the body after the first 120 days of pregnancy. After the first 120 days of pregnancy, which means that from the beginning of the pregnancy, there is a non-soul living creature, okay? Like the nutfa or the seminal fluid and the zygote is a living creature, but it's a non-soul one. It is a non-soul one. According to this mainstream understanding, which is the opinion of, I would say, the majority of scholars, that yes, pregnancy or the fetus actually is there, right? But it is, it is a non-soul or soulless, if you wish, living creature all the way until the 120th day of the pregnancy. Where did they get, this understanding from? Here is the hadith that you see in front of you. This is a very authentic hadith reported by Sahih Muslim. Yeah, Riyadh al-Salihin. Well, it is actually in both Bukhari and Muslim. Anyway, here is the translation of the hadith. The creation of you humans, where the Prophet ﷺ said, the creation of you humans is gathered in the form of seminal fluid, okay, in the womb of your mother for 40 days. And I want you to count with me. So far, how many days we have? 40 days. Then it becomes a clinging thing in similar period, right? So 40 plus 40, so far we have 80 days. Then it becomes a lump of flesh like that. That's another 40 days. So 40 plus 40 plus 40, that's 120 days. Divided by 30 days, which is the total number of days in each month, that is 4 months. That is 4 months, which means that 30, 60, 90, 120. Toward the end of the 4th month, according to the obvious understanding of the hadith, toward the end of the 120th day, the following event actually will take place. Okay, so after saying a lump of flesh like that, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends an angel who breathes the life into it. So this is a very straightforward to the point, right? After 120 days, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a malak, to blow or to breathe the life or the soul into that creature. And the angel is commanded to record 4 things about it. It's a provision, its terms of life, and etc., etc. So the emphasis in this hadith, as you see here, is that apparently, from the first impression, from the first time you read it, you can easily tell that the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that the soul is breathed in the body toward the end of the first 120 days, right? That's obvious and clear. Based on that, I mean, why the fuqaha or the jurists are so concerned about this hadith and some other hadith that discuss the same issue, which is the exact time where the soul is blown in the body, because I mean, this hadith does have a lot of consequences. The most important thing is the status of abortion, because we Muslims all know that murder is prohibited. That murder is prohibited. If it is proven that a certain pregnancy does have a soul, or the fetus does have a soul, then aborting, like intentional abortion of that particular pregnancy, is a crime in Islam. It is a murder, right? As simple as that. It is a murder. However, we have to prove first that the soul is blown into that body, into that fetus, in order for us to come up with a conclusion that, oh, abortion in this particular case is extremely prohibited because it is a murder. It is a murder. So again, based on this hadith, the soul is blown after 120 days. So based on that, the majority of the fuqaha says the following: abortion after 120 days is extremely prohibited. Is extremely prohibited. Okay, it is a kind or a form of murder, and it does actually have some consequences in the Islamic penal law. Whenever the pregnancy is 120 days plus. Okay, does this mean, even if you want to go with the mainstream fatwa, if you wish, does this mean that abortion prior to the first 120 days is absolutely permissible? Absolutely permissible, with no conditions, with no restrictions? This is absolutely wrong. And again, I want you to remember the introduction of this topic, that the fact that something is not extremely prohibited does not necessarily mean that it is extremely permissible or absolutely permissible. It could be extremely disliked or makruh. And this is actually what our fuqaha indicated, that if and only if before the soul is blown into the body, with the assumption that this is the only hadith that we have, which is not the case, by the way, even if we want to go with this mainstream approach, then abortion before 120 days, although it is not extremely prohibited, but it is extremely disliked. Why? Because you eliminate, you terminate, okay, the life of a potential or prospective soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create. Okay, if you leave that fetus alone without abortion, what will happen after 120 days? The soul will be blown, will be breathed. So you are stopping. I mean, this is their interpretation. You are stopping the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and thus abortion even before 120 days is extremely disliked, okay, unless there is a legitimate reason. Legitimate reason, for example, maybe the husband and the wife did not plan, okay, accordingly for this like unwanted pregnancy. Maybe they have a lot of kids like back to back. Maybe the mom is not healthy enough and he cannot afford having like pregnancy. Maybe she is extremely busy. Maybe she has some health complication that makes pregnancy extremely hard for her. If that is proven, then according to the mainstream fatwa here, that abortion is permissible only and only as long as there is a legitimate, desperate need for that. As long as there is a legitimate, desperate need for that. Before moving on, there is a very relevant issue here, which is the using the birth control. Okay, using the birth control. Is it permissible or not? Well, it is. Well, it is. How about coitus interruptus? Excuse me all. Coitus interruptus means ejaculating, like during the sexual intercourse, ejaculating outside the vagina. Okay? Outside the vagina. That's a kind of birth control, which means that the husband and the wife, the spouses, are intentionally planning for pregnancy. So they leave like a gap, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years between each pregnancy and the following one. We all agree, we all in agreement that using any kind of birth control, whether like pills for females, whether condom for male, excuse me, or whatever the method or the way that spouses use, that is permissible. And if we believe that this is something impermissible, then the outcome result is that every single spouses, every single husband and wife will be having a kid every single year. If birth control is prohibited. So this is not the case. Birth control actually is permissible, whatever the method used might be, as long as it does not cause any frustration or any maybe side effect, medical side effect or psychological or emotional side effect to both spouses, as long as it is done upon a mutual consent agreement between the spouses, then using any kind of birth control is permissible, right? What does the birth control have to do with our discussion? Well, it is very relevant, because when we use birth control, it means that we prevent the creation of a prospective human. Simple as that. When you use birth control, we prevent the creation of a human being, right? Because if we proceed with our sexual relationship with our spouses without having any kind of birth control, again, it means that every single year we will be having a new baby, right? Which is of course not the not the case. So some scholars said that if birth control is permissible, then any kind of abortion is permissible, as long as the soul is not blown into the body. This hadith actually, although sanad wise, chain of narrators, is agreed upon its authenticity, but the meaning or the proper interpretation of the hadith, believe it or not, is not something agreed upon. Yes, the Prophet ﷺ is using thumma, which means and then 40 days similar fluid, and then 40 days clot, and then 40 days a morsel of flesh, right? And then so 40 plus 40 plus 40, that's 120 days. But the question here, is this understanding agreed upon? Well, it is not. Believe it or not, it is not agreed upon. Arabic language is very deep and very rich. Sometimes you use the term thumma and then, but it does not necessarily indicate sequence or order. It does not necessitate sequence or order. Okay, I'll give you an example from the Quran itself. Let's go to Surah Al-Sajdah, and I want you to pay attention to what I'm saying here. Okay, go to ayah number 7, as you see here in the screen, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the creation of Adam. The creation of Adam. He said subhanahu wa ta'ala, alaykum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, الذي أحسن كل شيء خلقه. He is, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one who perfected everything that He created. Okay? وبدأ خلق الإنسان من طين. And He started the creation of a human from clay. Now, who is al-insan here? Who is the one who was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from clay? Is it you and I? No, it is Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. Adam actually is the only one who was created from tangible clay. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create him? We do not know. This is not our discussion. But I want to emphasize here that al-insan means the forefather of humanity, which is Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, because he is the one who was created from clay. Okay? And then he said, ثم, and then ثم جعل نسله من سلالة من ماء مهين. Right? ثم جعل نسله, and then he created his progeny, his offspring, right? Which is you and I, right? من سلالة من ماء مهين. And then he made, or he created his progeny, his offspring, from a similar fluid, which is you and I, right? And then the following ayah, ثم سواه ونفخ فيه من روحه. And then he created him, or he fashioned him, he shaped him, means that he identified his limbs and other parts of his body. ونفخ فيه من روحه. And then he blew in him from the soul that he created. What is the point here? The point here that if you want to go with the with the assumption that thumma means like, logical order. So the first thing happened, and then thumma the second thing, and then thumma the third one. You will be confusing yourself, because those ayat, ayah number 7 is talking about the creation of Adam, and then ayah number 8 is talking about the creation of the progeny or offspring of Adam والسلام, which is you and I. And then ayah number 9, as you see here on the screen, is going back to talking about whom? About the creation of Adam. So if this is not a Quran, and you want to put, the sentence is not the ayat in order, then it should be الذي أحسن كل شيء خلقه وبدأ خلق الإنسان من طين. He is the one who created, he is the one who perfected everything he created, and he started the creation of Adam from a clay. Skip ayah number 8, and then ثم سواه, and then he shaped him, he fashioned him, meaning whom? Adam. ونفخ فيه من روحه, right? So the creation of Adam and the perfection of the creation of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was done first, and then Eve or Hawa was created, and then because of the marriage of Adam and Eve, their offspring have been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, this is the logical order. However, the ayat in the Quran here are indicating otherwise. So what is the conclusion here? Conclusion here is that having the term thumma and then in the Quran or in the Sunnah does not necessarily mean sequence. Does not necessarily mean sequence. I mean, this is the conclusion. Having said that, let's go back to the hadith itself, that the vast majority, the mainstream fatwa is adopting, to say that the creation, the soul is blown into the body toward the end of the 120th day. Based on this hadith, we can easily argue that by saying, well, this is not something agreed upon. Using the term thumma does not mean that we are like putting incidents or events in sequence. Okay, it could mean, for example, that after the 40 days the soul is blown, and then another 40 days after the soul is blown, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the pregnancy or the fetus here, according to the hadith, then it becomes a clinging thing, right? And then after that it becomes like a morsel of flesh, right? ثم علقة ثم مضغة. So this hadith does not necessarily mean that the soul is blown into the body by the end of the 120th day. Okay, now this is the argument that we can easily make here. Okay, why should we make an argument here? Why do we not just take the hadith as is? Because we have several hadith in the authentic sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ indicating otherwise, that the soul is blown after the 40th day of the pregnancy. Okay, one hadith, إذا مر بالنطفة, there is a second hadith, which is a very authentic one, narrated by Muslim, by the way. Where is it? Okay, here is the hadith. Prophet this is in Sahih Muslim, you see. When 42 nights, here's the hadith in Arabic. إذا مر بالنطفة 42 ليلة بعث الله إليها ملكا فصورها وخلق سمعها. You see, when 42 nights pass after the semen gets into the womb, Allah sends the angel and gives him shape. Okay, then he creates his sense of hearing, sense of sight, etc., etc. What is the emphasis in the hadith here? Emphasis is that the Prophet ﷺ is indicating clearly that after the passing of 42 days, we do have some other hadith in Sahih Muslim, 40 أو 45, okay, either 40 or 45 days. So we have 40, we have 42, we have 45. But definitely those hadith do not support the fact that the soul is blown toward the end of the first 120 days of the pregnancy. And the gap between the two actually is huge. You are talking about 40, 60, you're talking about 80 days. You see, 80 days, that 80 days. So the difference actually is huge between the hadith. Okay. Now here is the hadith one more time for those who did not pay attention. When 42 nights pass after the semen gets into the womb, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends the angel and gives him shape. Then he creates his sense of hearing, sense of sight, his skin, his flesh, etc., etc. Okay. You might say, hold a second. This hadith does not indicate that the angel or the malak is blowing the soul. Show it to me. There is no indication. And I would say, yes, you are absolutely right. But considering all the hadith talking about this particular issue, okay, makes you conclude that shaping or fashioning the body, shaping the body is always associated with the blown of the soul. So they come two in one. Okay. When the angel actually comes, okay, he shapens the body, he fashions the body, okay, like, identifies the fingers and the limbs and the head and other parts of the body, as well as he blows the soul into the body. So they come simultaneously two in one. Okay. So far, we ended up having a clear contradiction. I mean, how comes that one hadith indicates 120 days and the other hadith indicates 42 days? There is no way to put them together. Well, there is a way to put them together. Okay, that's called al-jam'. Al-jam' actually is the consolidation, the appreciation, the consideration of the hadith that are apparently contradicting one another. Well, the Prophet ﷺ does not contradict himself, period. Make no mistake about it. I mean, وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. Does not speak his mind. It is a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If there is a contradiction or apparent contradiction in the hadith, it means that our understanding is not good enough. I mean, our understanding of the Sunnah and the Quran is not good enough to conclude the right conclusion. It doesn't mean that there is something wrong with the Quran or with the Sunnah. There's something wrong with our understanding. We could not understand it correctly. Long story short, and I will open the floor for question and answer. I know that you have a lot of questions here. Long story short is that we can easily consolidate those two hadith by saying the first hadith that indicates 120 days does not necessarily mean 120 days for the soul to be blown. It means that the creation is phased into 3 or 4 phases, right? 40 days, 40 days, 40 days. But after the end or toward the end of the first 40 days, the angel comes and he blows the soul into the body. Why? This is the only way we can consolidate, we can consider this hadith with the other one in Sahih Muslim that indicates clearly that the soul is blown into the body after the end of the 42nd night, when 42 nights pass after the semen, as I already get the hadith. So what is the conclusion here? Until today, let me share with you something else. Here we go. Until today, the mainstream fatwa is that the soul is blown into the body, okay, after 120 days. And based on this mainstream fatwa, abortion is extremely prohibited. It's a kind of murder if it is done after 120 days. According to this mainstream fatwa, abortion before 120 days is not permissible. It is extremely disliked, makruh, and it has to be taken case by case basis. That pregnant woman has to consult with the faqih, with the jurist whom she trusts his religiosity and his knowledge, to give her a specific fatwa that yes, you can go ahead and abort the fetus that you have because of whatever the reason might be. Okay, now if you ask me personally, do I believe that the soul is blown after 120 days? My answer is no. I wholeheartedly believe that the soul is blown after the first 42 days of the pregnancy because of the other hadith. And we have a lot of hadith actually support the second hadith. that the angel comes, to shape or to fashion the body, okay, either by the 40th or the 42nd or the 45th days. And this hadith that indicates 120 days can easily actually be not manipulated, can be understood, okay, to consolidate it with the other hadith that using thumma does not necessarily actually mean sequence or an order. It's very, very possible that the angel comes after the first 40 days to blow the soul, while the creation of the fetus actually is phased out into 3 or 4 or even 5 phases. However, what you see in front of you here actually is the mainstream fatwa that the soul is blown after 120 days. After 120 days, abortion is extremely prohibited. It's a kind of murder. After the 120 days, abortion is permissible in one case only, when the pregnancy forms a serious threat to the life of the mother. Okay, if the professional specialized doctors, for example, told the mom, the pregnant woman, that if you keep that pregnancy, you might lose your own life. You might lose your own life. So it's either or. You have to choose. If you want to save, if you want to rescue yourself, then you have to go ahead and just abort the baby. If that is proven, then abortion, according to the mainstream fatwa, is permissible even in the 9 months of the pregnancy, even just a few days before the due delivery date, the wilada date, or giving birth, still permissible. Why? Because keeping the pregnancy actually would form a threat to the life of the woman. Now, this is the mainstream fatwa. Abortion before 120 days is extremely disliked. Okay, my personal understanding, to my knowledge, I might be wrong, that the soul is blown by the 42nd days, and all these rules that I mentioned are applied or are applicable by the 42nd days, not by the first 120 days. So based on that, abortion before 42 days is extremely disliked unless there is a legitimate, desperate, dire need for it. Abortion after 42 days is extremely prohibited. Abortion after 42 days is permissible in one case, if keeping the pregnancy would form a serious threat to the life of the mother. Wallahu alam. This is briefly what I have about this subject. Of course, if you go to the hadith and read, maybe we have more than 10-15 different narrations of the hadith, but of course, this is not the right forum to discuss all of them in details. So this is briefly what I have. Wallahu alam wa sallallahu ala Muhammad. I will open the floor for question and answer. I know that you have a lot of questions related to this topic. So the floor is yours. Go ahead. Okay, even here in the Facebook, Abulin is saying 120 days هي 3 أشهر. لا، هي 4 أشهر يا حبيب. هي 4 أشهر. يعني 120 تقسيم 30 60 90 120 4 أشهر. أي نعم. طيب. عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay, brothers, the floor is yours. Brother Yasin, please go ahead. If you want to open the floor for question and answer, I'm ready.
Yeah, this is Shah Jahan here, brothers. Please make use of this time if you have any questions.
Let me stop sharing here. Stop sharing. Okay. Am I still sharing my screen, Brother Shah?
Yes, you are.
Oh. So, new share. Well, do you know how to stop sharing?
Yeah, you can do stop sharing.
Okay. Oh, stop sharing. Okay. There we go. Allah.
And also, if you want, you can also type in the questions, please, and then
sure.
I will read it out for you.
شيخ حمزة حبيبنا يقول الله تعالى وحمله فصار 30 شهرا يكون 2 و6 أشهر بينما الحمل 9 أشهر من قول هذا لا يتوكل أن الروح لا تنفخ إلا بعد. لا يا حبيب، لا علاقة بينهم، لا علاقة بينهم. طيب خير إن شاء الله. Yes, brothers, sisters, go ahead. Brother Shah, any comments, any question?
Sheikh, looks like we don't have any. So if that's the case, I think we could probably conclude this session. Inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan for taking this topic. And as we discuss, inshallah, probably every other week we can choose a topic from the community and have that discussion.
Absolutely. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.